Hello, everyone. We're so excited to present Neuro and Communications with Dr. Alie Caldwell joining us today. We are so incredibly honored to be joined by her. Dr. Caldwell is a distinguished neuroscientist and science writer. She holds a PhD in neurosciences from UCSD and a bachelor's in brain and cognitive sciences from MIT. And she currently is the science editor for the Department of Development at the Mayo Clinic, where she leads content development and editing. So I think I'll hand it off to you, Dr. Caldwell, if you're ready.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here for your inaugural seminar. I'm really excited to speak about my experiences and hopefully through talking about my so far winding journey in neuroscience, can help you all understand a little bit better what kinds of careers are available to someone with a background in neuroscience in writing. So if you're interested in combining a love for writing and storytelling with your love of the brain, some of these might be good opportunities for you. Um, as Irene said, I'm Alie Caldwell. My journey has been very winding. And I know you guys are like high school students, so this is going to make me, I'm aging myself here. But in 2013, I started my PhD at UCSD. So this was following my undergraduate degree at MIT. And then I spent a couple of years working as a lab technician in a research lab. I also spent some time during those 2 years debating whether or not I wanted to go to medical school or graduate school, and ultimately decided to pursue my PhD. From there, in 2014, I entered a brain awareness video contest through Society for Neuroscience. And if you're interested in videos and the brain, this is a great opportunity for you to check out. We won second place in our first time entering that contest. And that kind of was the inspiration that led us to launch our channel Neurotransmissions in 2015. And around the same time, I started to build this portfolio of science writing, of video work, which led me to the opportunity to write for SciShow. I don't know if you're familiar with the channel, but it's a pretty big YouTube channel with several offshoots that does videos about all kinds of science-related topics. And so I did that for several years while I was completing my PhD. And toward the end of my time working on my PhD, I started to try to consider next steps. I sort of reached a crossroads where I could have stayed for like another 2 to 3 years to do some additional projects to finish out the work on the paper, or I could defend and let others in the lab finish the work. And ultimately, I opted to defend after I received the Science Communication Fellowship. The Bigelow Science Communication Fellowship was a 9-month fellowship opportunity in a communications department at UC San Diego. And then from there, I had the opportunity to become the senior science writer at the University of Chicago Medicine. So that took us back from San Diego back to the Midwest, where I'm originally from. And after a few years at U Chicago Medicine, I was hungry for something new. So I took a jump into the pharmaceutical industry as a medical writer with a medical and scientific communications agency. But pretty quickly realized that it wasn't a great fit for me at this stage in my life. And so really got very lucky because the next thing that showed up on my list was this really unique and new opportunity as the science editor for Mayo Clinic's Department of Development, where I now work editing our scientific content, developing resources for our fundraisers. But all of the work that I do now is targeted to our benefactors. So the goal is to help these individuals who have quite a lot of financial resources understand the importance and benefits of the work that we're doing in Mayo Clinic in order to help them make decisions about how to best support our work. So why a career in science writing? The first and kind of most obvious thing is that I enjoy it. I don't think anybody should pursue a career that they definitely think they're not going to like. I get to think and write and talk about all different kinds of biomedical science every day. But some of the other things that have majorly contributed to these decisions in my life are the work-life balance. So what are the expectations around my time working versus my time, off work? Also, location. There are a lot more limitations in location if you are in an academic research track than if you're pursuing writing careers, as well as concerns around income and benefits. So for me, I loved being a scientist. I would have loved to stay a scientist, but there were other things that I wanted in my life that I could not really do on on that kind of income. And it's a slow ramp. You have to be ready to not make very much money for a very long time in academic research. So where my science writing all began, I don't know if any of you have seen this, but this was really the first kind of video project that I did. So before I went to graduate school, I had considered myself a writer, but I always focused on creative writing. And I never really thought about marrying my interest in writing with my interest in science. And so it wasn't until I got to graduate school and I found out that the people in my graduate program were making this parody music video to the song Get Lucky by Daft Punk. And the point of the music video was to advertise for a party that we were going to be hosting during a conference that fall. And my husband is very interested in filmmaking and has done some work in that space. And so I asked my classmates, hey, would you guys like somebody with video experience to help with this project? And they were very enthusiastic. And so my husband jumped in and got involved. And I can just share a little clip of this video that included, just all of us playing, having fun, dancing. It's all about being in grad school, trying to get your data for a research conference. So that was our first little taste, not really educational in any way, but just an opportunity for us to work together on a video project. And after that project, let's go to the next slide if I can. There we go. After that project, I found out about the Brain Awareness Video Contest through a classmate. And then from there, my husband and I said, this has been really fun. We're really enjoying working on this together because I was writing the script. I was acting as the host in the video. My husband was doing the editing and the filming. And it ultimately led us to launch Neurotransmissions. So we launched a little bit about 9 years ago now in 2015 and have since grown the channel to about 220,000 subscribers. And our content originally was focused on very educational content. It was the stuff you could learn in an introduction to neuroscience lecture in a college course, but rather than being an hour-long lecture, it was a 5 to 7 minute long video with animations to help clarify the concept. So we did things like, what is a neuron? What is an action potential? What are the parts of the brain? These kind of basic science topics. And then from there, it's evolved into kind of more holistic topics that have more kind of social and cultural impacts. So some of our recent videos have been on topics like EMDR therapy and kind of what is the history of that? What is the evidence for EMDR? Or a video we just did was about ketamine, at-home ketamine treatments for depression and anxiety, and sort of what's the history of ketamine use? How does it work in the brain? How do we understand how it works in the brain? And sort of what is this impact of being able to use it at home for treating these mental health conditions? And that's been a lot of fun, but this has always been sort of the side project in my life. We never wanted neurotransmissions to become our full-time job. But as I was completing my PhD, I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to work in research labs yet, but if you have any familiarity with the research project, you probably understand that it tends to be a very long and slow process. So I spent 5 years in my graduate lab, and then a little bit more in some other projects, and ultimately did not even complete a paper. So I didn't even get my paper done before I was defending my PhD. And luckily, my graduate program did not have a requirement that I publish before I leave. But I love the work that I did. The project was very cool. I studied the role of brain cells called astrocytes in the development of neurons, and particularly with a focus on how the proteins secreted by astrocytes impact the way that neurons develop and connect with one another. So I was looking at astrocytes grown in vitro in a dish and looking at the proteins that they spit out into the dish, and then seeing how that impacted neuronal development, and specifically looking at astrocytes from genetic models of different neurodevelopmental disorders that are known to have issues with neuronal development. So all my work was so basic. This is part of why it took such a long time, because I had to develop a new protocol. I had to test all of these new approaches to doing this. I had to figure out how to isolate the cells from these genetic disorders. Nobody had done this stuff before. So it was very exciting and I loved it very much, but it was also slow going. It was a very long time before we had anything that was ready to share. And ultimately, I started this project in summer 2014, and the paper on this research published in summer of 2022. So it was a very long window to getting that paper out the door. But all along that time, I was also working on my YouTube channel, and I started writing for SciShow, and I freelanced for blogs, and I wrote for my grad program blog. And I found that science writing was really great because it was this opportunity to get like a quick hit, right? Like you could do something quick, you could get positive feedback right away. I was good at it. People liked what I was doing. And for grad school, it was a hobby, but pretty early on, I started to think, oh, like I like this, I can do this. And there are opportunities in this space for someone with my background. And as I started to better understand what the academic research track would look like, I started to think more and more about science writing as an alternative to that, because I could see that, in academia, you have to do a postdoc. These days, postdoc can be 5, 6, 7 years long, and then maybe you have to do another postdoc. Then you start applying to faculty positions, but there's only a few faculty positions per year. They're very limited in where you can go. It was just it. There were a lot of things about that I looked at and said, I don't know if I want to do that. So I started to think more and more seriously about science writing as a career path. And again, just thinking about what I did want, as I got to my defense, I really thought about what I did want. As much as I love my research, what are the other things that I wanted to make my life feel whole? So I really wanted to be closer to my family. I'm from the Midwest originally. Unfortunately, the Midwest is not a particularly hot spot for top tier research. There are some really great researchers here, but most of the types of research I wanted to work on were not in this region. I wanted to have a higher income. People say go into STEM because it pays well. Not this kind of STEM. And I also just wanted a clearer path to professional opportunity and growth. Because like I said, it's a really long journey in academic science, and it sounded really long and really exhausting and no guarantee in the end that it was going to work out. And so when I defended in 2019, I decided to pursue a science communication fellowship that fall. At the same time, neurotransmissions really actually started to take off. So we signed a contract to write a book that fall. We were invited to join a creator network that's helped get us set up with sponsors. So it just became, much more obvious that our YouTube work was something that, could go places. I was also job hunting in February of 2020, and you might remember that was not a great time to be looking for major life changes or trying to get a job somewhere. But I got very lucky because University of Chicago Medicine ultimately still was hiring for the senior science writer position. And so I got a position as senior science writer. I moved to Chicago with my husband, and we wrote our book in 2020. 2020 was a really, I think for a lot of people, was a very reflective time. We wrote our book. I thought a lot about what I wanted. I called it the post-PhD hangover because it was a tough transition to go from being in the lab to being in front of a computer writing all day. It was a very different kind of experience to what I was used to. And it really made me question, what is in a career? What do I want in my career? After so many years of identifying as a scientist, like my job title was my personal identity. How do I adjust the way that I think about that? So I started to think about, what are the other things that I'm doing in my life? What are the other things taking up my time? And how do I want to position my career in relation to those other things? So during this period, I got into some new video games. I don't know if any of you guys are Zelda fans, but I'm still playing Tears of the Kingdom. I started learning how to quilt, started pursuing some other creative hobbies. I had a pretty serious medical event that was really stressful and was very challenging to navigate navigate my career around the medical event. My husband and I bought a house. It's 120 years old and it needs a lot of work. So we were investing a lot of time and money into our home improvement projects. We were closer to our families, so we started spending time with our families again. We started building a community in our new neighborhood. And then in 2022, I became a parent. And spoiler alert, kids take a lot of time and energy. And maybe when you have a baby, you're a little bit less focused on your career goals. So all of these things, kind of had me thinking a lot about what I wanted long term. And I started to get kind of itchy at U Chicago Medicine. So just to talk a little bit more about what I was doing at U Chicago, I was in a position that I would describe as being an institutional science writer, or other job titles you might see like this are communications specialist, communications manager. There are even positions like social media manager type jobs that can do this kind of work. But ultimately, my title was science writer. And my role on the team, I was positioned in the communications department at the University of Chicago Medicine. So the Department of Medicine encompassed both the biology department at the University of Chicago as well as the hospital of University of Chicago. And my work was basically working with our researchers and clinicians, as well as other communications professionals at the university, to identify key stories of interest and write all of this content about those stories. So this includes press releases, which are pieces that we write for the media specifically to inform them of exciting research findings. This included blog posts, like features of our researchers and projects that are happening at the university, news features that are like bigger stories about topics like climate change, women in STEM, kind of larger stories, and other multimedia resources like videos and podcasts to share the research happening on our campus with our community. So these days, especially, science journalism is, a lot of people would say that it's a dying field. A lot of newsrooms are not investing in more journalists. There are fewer people out there who specialize in specific areas of journalism. And I would argue that science journalism in particular is an area where you do need to have some expertise, because not everybody can pick up a research paper and read it right off the bat. And so as a result, more and more institutions, more universities, hospitals, research institutes, they are building out their communications teams to produce this content that can be handed to journalists to help them tell stories about this work. So it's public relations work, it's media relations. My job was to make the University of Chicago look good, but I also wanted to tell cool stories. And so on the left, here's a screenshot of a few of the stories that I wrote. I got to write a really cool story about the relationship between certain genes and surviving the Black Death. I got to write about octopus nervous systems, all this stuff. So it was really cool work. I really enjoyed it, generally speaking, but I got kind of itchy because I could see that there wasn't a lot of room for me to grow. It was a lot of me being asked to write stories about things that other people had already decided should be written about, and I didn't have the opportunity to do a lot of my own creative thinking about the kinds of stories that I thought we should tell, or that I really thought would kind of be cool to put out there for the public to know about our university. And so I ultimately decided to take a break from that work. And I had a friend who worked in pharmaceuticals, and I had no interest in pharmaceuticals up to this point. I didn't know anything about it. But my friend told me that it was a really cool opportunity to work with top tier clinical experts in certain disease states, to get to, be the smartest person in the room, to write all of this really highly technical content. And it sounded really appealing. So I transitioned into pharma for a hot second. And now medical writing is an area that I feel like people really, unless you know people who know the industry, you don't hear a lot about this, but wow, is there a lot of money in that industry? So as a medical writer, my role was to be on a large team at our agency where we supported our client who had a particular drug that they were marketing to the public. This drug was to treat a very particular condition. It was also being reviewed for approval to treat another similar condition. And our work was what is called peer-to-peer marketing. And so what this is in pharma is it's basically, I don't know if you know this, pharmaceutical industry companies, these pharma companies pay doctors, they hire and train doctors to present information about their drug to other doctors. And this is true for medical devices. This is true for all kinds of things in the industry. But the idea was that these doctors would come in and they would learn about the drug. They would learn about the data that supported the use of this drug, why this drug was better than the other drugs available. And then they would go out and they would host these dinners or lunches where they would present that information to other physicians. And that kind of peer-to-peer element's really important, right? Because physicians listen to other physicians. They're not going to be as likely to listen to like a marketer or a sales rep. They really want to hear from other doctors about why this drug is the right drug to give their patients. And so my work in medical writing was to write that content for the doctors. So it was highly technical. It was very clinical. It was very much like here is the clinical trial where we studied this drug. Here's how we know it works. Here's the data. And there were aspects of that were really great and really fun. And I really liked creating that content. It was very fun and creative. I got to think a lot about how do we tell this story while being honest, right? Because I had a lot of situations where the client would come to me and they would say, okay, we want to say this about our drug. We want to be able to say this line. But in pharma, because of government oversight of our drugs, which is very important because you don't want pharma companies to just be able to say whatever they want, everything you say about a drug has to be backed up by data. And this literally includes, like in our content, I have to be able to look at a slide and take a number on the slide, and I have to be able to go to a research paper and point to that number and say, this is how I can make this claim. Like, this is how I can say this. I know that this data is true. And you literally have to make those connections that like, there's a whole software platform that does this, that if the FDA ever wants to come and like double check all your claims, they can see exactly how you got every claim you made. So a lot of my work was involving our client saying, I want you to say this about our drug, and me saying, okay, is there data that backs up that claim, and figuring out how to do that. So it was great in a lot of ways. It was primarily for physician audiences. I also produced some content for patient audiences. I really thought, like, I don't know if this is surprising to any of you. I was a little bit surprised by how much I really felt like the work I did benefited patients. The drug I worked on treated a long-term incurable but not terminal condition. And the drug that I worked on really benefited these patients. It really made a huge difference in their lives. And that was very cool to see, to get to hear from patients about how this drug was really changing their lives. But it, also operating under these really strict federal guidelines. So that kind of made like a fun puzzle. Ultimately, what pushed me away from that work is that it's just extremely fast paced and there are very high expectations on your availability. I think at a different time in my life, if I had a different trajectory in my life, I think it would have been really a great position for me long term. But ultimately, I, struggled with the expectations of being available after hours, the expectations of answering emails outside of my working hours, the expectation about being able to just like jump up and go to something in person when I, had a baby at home was really challenging. And so ultimately realized it was not the best fit for me. And so from there, I started looking for other opportunities that were more like what I had been doing at U Chicago, but hopefully with a little bit more of that like strategic thinking that I had really loved. And one of the things that really I felt like I learned in grad school was how to solve problems and how to come up with new ideas and new approaches to doing things. And so I applied for this opportunity at the Mayo Clinic. And this was a brand new job. It had not existed before. But the Mayo Clinic Department of Development, our whole job is to get benefactors to help fund the work at Mayo Clinic. And our leadership wanted somebody who had scientific background, who could come in and who could support our team's understanding of science to be able to explain that to our benefactors. And the reasoning is, these days, a lot of the stuff, it's not as simple as saying like, okay, here's, we're going to give you a surgery and that's going to cure your disease. It's stuff like, using AI to identify new potential drugs. It's using AI to scan your genome for risk factors. It's complicated technologies like CAR T therapy and theranostics and carbon ion therapy that are these like really technical topics that we're, trying to push the boundaries of medical work with, but they're hard to explain to a benefactor. So my work is now leading content development for some of our benefactor proposals and reports to tell our benefactors how their money is being spent. But I also work on our benefactor magazine. I work on video projects. I provide editorial support for my peers because a lot of our work involves getting content from doctors about the work that they're doing and then translating that into something a benefactor can digest, but also developing resources to help bolster our team's overall scientific acumen. So helping them feel more comfortable being able to talk about these topics with our researchers. And I really love this work because it's now a great balance between, that kind of problem solving, critical thinking, strategic planning. And getting to write about science in a lot of different topics in a lot of different ways. And it's also a very good work-life balance at Mayo Clinic versus my work in the pharmaceutical industry. So, I'm sorry, I kind of blitzed through this. I got excited and rushed a little bit, but that's kind of the bulk of my talk. And I guess what I really want people to take away from this is just there are a lot of options in science writing. So there's everything from like freelance science journalism where you work for yourself, you work your own hours, you manage your own client portfolio, to science journalism in a newsroom or with a science publication. You can work in science publishing, like in publishing papers, which is like kind of the one area I've never dipped in my toe, is like working for a scientific journal. And that work involves like reviewing papers, editing the papers when they come in and get accepted, managing that whole peer review process. But there's also these other sort of more institutional based opportunities. So, you typically think of science writing as like writing for Scientific American or for Nature. But you can also write about science for a university or a hospital or NASA, all kinds of opportunities like that. And then also, there's an entire industry in pharma where science writing is a critical component of what they do. And that industry in particular really requires that intense scientific training. You really have to understand the work and how to interpret scientific information to be successful in medical writing. Like medical writing jobs require a PhD. You really can't get a medical writer job without a PhD. So, all of these opportunities are available out there. And I think for me, the decision came down to like, what do you want the shape of your life to look like? Where does your career fall within your map of yourself? I spent a really long time calling myself a scientist. That was like my primary driver in my life, was being a scientist. And now I am a writer, but it's only one element of my map of myself. It's just one thing on the list. I'm also a wife and a mom and a homeowner and a quilter and a gardener and a cook, all these other things that I like to do with my time. And, for some people, I think that identity tied to your work can work really well. People can be really passionate about their jobs. Like I said, I loved being a researcher. I thought it was amazing. But ultimately, I made compromises on my career in order to make space for these other things that I wanted for myself and for my life. And so I think it's important just to think big picture. Your job is not the end all be all of your day to day. There are typically at least 8 other hours a day where you can be doing other things with your time that you enjoy, that are satisfying and fulfilling. And it's okay to change your mind. I went to graduate school thinking I was going to be a professor one day. I was going to run my own lab. Obviously, that is not the case now. It's okay to change your mind, and it's okay to change it again. You can always try something different. There will always be new opportunities out there as long as you're willing to take the time to figure out what you want to do and how to best position yourself for those opportunities. I think especially if you do a PhD, there's a lot of ways you can spin that training, a lot of ways you can talk about the work that you did to frame yourself as a great candidate for a lot of different kinds of job opportunities. So there's a lot of a lot of stuff out there that you can do.